Hi, and welcome back to Postscript. John Petersen is my name from the Arlington Institute, and we're here with Gregg Braden, our friend, New York Times bestselling author and Templeton Prize nominee and good friend, and we're happy to have you. We talked in the first segment, and we hope you'll take a look at it, about some of the big things that were going on in the world and this extraordinary transition that we're going through. And now, that leads you to say, so what's happening in humans and how do you get from here to there?
Well, this is where it gets really exciting, even more exciting for me. And the really good news is that there is something within us that gives us the ability to adapt and as I mentioned, to thrive, not just survive, but thrive. We are literally wired for change, and we're wired to thrive in the kinds of changes we're seeing, but we're not told that. And if you don't know that, we are what are called self-referencing beings, John, and for viewers that may not be really clear on what that is, consciously and subconsciously, we tend to hinge our sense of well-being on the world around us.
Of course.
So you think about this, you come home from work and you watch the news, and if the stock market crashes and wars are going on everywhere, and you got power shortages going on, you're tense inside. But nothing changed in here. It's how you perceive your outer world. This is why I think the new discoveries about the human body are so powerful, because we're now learning that we are born with and arrived on this planet with, and I want to talk about what that means, we arrived on this planet with the ability to self-regulate already intact. It did not evolve slowly, gradually over long periods of time. What the new discoveries are showing is that anatomically modern humans, that's us, we showed up 200,000 years ago, and scientists agree upon the date. They say, yes, modern humans appeared 200,000 years ago. We don't know where we came from. And the mystery now is why we showed up fully intact. We haven't changed in 200,000 years. Anatomically modern humans are today as they were 200,000 years ago. So our ability to adapt to this change is not something that evolves slowly, gradually over a long period of time. It appears to be
built in.
It is. We gave it to us at the factory, wherever the factory is. And so people say, well, how do you know this? Where does this information come from? And this is where it gets. This is where science fiction meets science fact. If you saw the movie Jurassic Park, for example, the first one, the really good one, they were all okay, but the first one really had the new ideas. And in the movie Jurassic Park, they were able to extract the DNA from fossilized remains of ancient forms of life, build the genome, and then in the movie, they actually reconstituted and brought those forms of life to life. Now, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't gone quite that far, though I'm sure in somebody's basement somewhere, they're working on it. I know, that's another postscript.
Right.
But what we are doing at the university level now is we're able to extract the DNA from the bone marrow of ancient forms of life, including ancient forms of us, and rebuilding the genome so that we now can look at the genome 200,000 years ago of anatomically modern humans. We can compare it to ours today. And this is where heads are rolling, and this is where pushback is coming in the universities. This is where friends of mine, colleagues, who have been teaching these subjects are refusing to share the new discoveries. They're saying we're going to retire. We're going to wait it out and retire and let the new professors deal with this, because here's what it's showing. The new DNA is showing we appeared, anatomically modern humans showed up 200,000 years ago, fully enabled, fully intact, the same body proportions that we have now, the same cranial capacity. We have a brain about 50% larger than any other primate, that we are not the descendants of Cro-Magnon. We're not the descendants of Neanderthal. They compared Neanderthal to us, and they said not only did we not descend from Neanderthal, but we walked the earth with them and interbred. They said we probably had Neanderthal boyfriends and girlfriends. And so many people today, if you go 23andMe or Ancestry.com and you do a check, you'll say, well, I have some Neanderthal DNA. It's very possible because there was interbreeding. We did not descend from them. We don't know where we came from. Now, where this gets especially interesting is that this is like CSI type of science now, a crime scene investigation, the TV series, because now they're able to work backward. They can take the advanced DNA that we have, work backward and say, what had to happen? to give us the capabilities that we have today. And what that is revealing is that there were fusions of chromosomes in the past that cannot be attributed to natural environments. They're not the product of evolution. There are tweakings of genes that are so precise, and all of these things happened right at that 200,000 year mark, rather than slowly, gradually over long periods of time. Now, I want to be very clear about what I'm saying. Evolution is a fact. And as a geologist, I've seen it in the fossil record. Many forms of life, plants, animals, insects, the theory breaks down when it comes to humans. And this is important because in the first segment of this postscript, we talked about us adapting to the world by the way we think. And the hate that's emerging is based upon the way we've been taught to think. We have been taught that we're the product of a random process of mutations that just happen to occur. And given the same circumstances on another planet, it would happen again. Nothing really so special about life. And when you begin thinking that way, it's very easy to take the life of another living being, human or animal. And that goes right to the core of war. It goes right to the core of the way survival of the strongest, the way we've been taught to think. The problem is, John, that the new discoveries are telling us we are not the product of random mutations. We're not an accident of biology. So they're saying this now has led, I love the terminology, this has led to what is called forbidden territory in science, which I love, because it appears to be intentional. They say there appears to be an intentionality underlying our DNA, especially chromosome 2 that we can talk about, chromosome 7. And if there is an intentionality, it implies purpose. And that's where we're going with this whole thing, purpose. The purpose, I believe, I mean, I could spend the rest of my life trying to figure out what happened and how we got here, and it's interesting, and I do pursue that. But if you let all of that go, and now you say, okay, we are imbued with a biology that empowers us to self-regulate in a way no other form of life is given the ability to self-regulate their biology. What does that mean? To create a strong immune system when we choose, to awaken longevity enzymes when we choose, to create resilience to change so that we have the stamina to deal with that resilience. New ways of thinking, super memory, super cognition, all of these things we now have at our fingertips. We've been told that we're powerless, separate from our world, and that those abilities are relegated to special people like monks and nuns and shamans and mystics who've renounced all their world possessions and they live in a monastery halfway around the world. You can do that, but you can also awaken these things in your living room. And that is where the new frontier, the new science, is the ability to self-regulate our biology, which would be cool anyway, in the presence of the changes that we're talking about. We're no longer dependent upon the outside world for our sense of well-being. We create our own sense of well-being, and that unhooks us from being victims and empowers us to make really beautiful, very powerful, wise, and from my perspective, more objective kinds of changes, because we're not doing it out of fear as we solve the problems of the world.
The whole thing hinges on a change in perspective, essentially. And that we walked into this space, and historically humans have always presumed that we were unique, and that what we saw was what we got, and there wasn't anything else, more or less. Of course, there's angels and weird things that are kind of floated in and out every once in a while, but in terms of kind of the reality, it's always been this kind of narrow, kind of planet-based kind of notion. And to presume that we are the only and most specific and most important kind of life in the whole universe, gives you that kind of narrow hubristic kind of
human-centric view.
Human-centric view. And so when you talk about this transition to a new world, there's a whole different mind shift. There's a mind shift that has to happen. And one of those is this notion of this larger sense of the reality that we all live in, and that we're not just one species that happened along. I mean, it's hard for me to understand people who think that we're the only life that there's ever been, that out of these billions of planets and other
A
kinds
waste of
things.
space, isn't it?
I mean, it's far more likely
Yeah.
that we're just one of the same thing that's been happening all over the place, and there's kind of a pattern and a shape and a way in which this all happens. And by the way, that there's input that helps to move this along and change genes or whatever it turns out to be. And that starts to say, wait a second, this is a lot bigger than what we thought.
I agree, and there's two ways of thinking about this, and I am a scientist, and in the scientific community, you go to the conferences, and it's interesting because publicly there's the conference, but it's what happens behind the scenes is where the action is. That's where the really good stuff happens. And that's where you get to hear very well-known scientists and the different views that they have. So for example, there is one school of thinking that says we've got to figure out what happened 200,000 years ago. How did those changes get made? And if they're not through evolution, who or what is responsible? We've got to figure that out before we can move forward. There's another school of thought that I subscribe to that says by embracing the extraordinary potential within us, as we embrace that and learn to utilize it in our everyday lives, we become new people. Extraordinary, super cognition, super memory, new brain states, and by embracing our potential, that will lead us to the answer of who or what is responsible and who are we ultimately. So what we're finding, and I use brain states as a perfect example. When I was in school back in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, I was taught there were 4 brain states, and that's what most people today will say. If you ask someone on the street, what are the human brain states, those that are even thinking along those lines, they'll talk about the delta, the very low brain waves, theta, and the alpha and the beta. That's what our textbooks pretty much are showing right now. Scientists said the human brain cannot possibly sustain electrical frequencies higher than we have in those brain states. Then the Tibetan monks came along, and the monks said, well, if we do a certain kind of meditation, we can exceed that. And the scientists said, well, show us. And all of a sudden, where we were topping out, at maybe 40 cycles per second in the gamma brain state, the monks were going even higher than that, up to 100 cycles per second. And the scientists said, well, okay, so we've got a new kind of gamma, we'll call it hyper gamma, but can't go possibly any higher than that. And then the monks said, well, if we do a different kind of meditation, we can double that, 200 cycles per second. And they said, well, that's not possible. And so now they did that, and we have a new brain state that is called the lambda brain state, 200 cycles per second. On the low end, delta begins at 0.1 hertz. And they said, we can't go any lower than that. And the Tibetan monks said, well, here, we'll show you. Mm. And they entered into a brain state where there's no perceptible breath, no perceptible heartbeat. For all intents and purposes, you would think they're not conscious, but they're very awake and very conscious. And the reason I'm sharing this is because whether you go in through the lambda, very high, or this is called the epsilon, very low, they lead to the same, both of those extremes lead to the same states of consciousness that attune us to a greater existence in the field that surrounds all things. Scientists now know it's no longer a theory. It is a fact. There's a field of energy. The Higgs field was confirmed at CERN through the superconducting supercolliders, mashing particles together, recreating the first moments of the universe, and what fields and what the properties were of those fields are there. So scientists say, okay, there's a field out there. Surrounds all things, and we're connected to it. What does that mean? And the Tibetans are showing us that through changing the brain states, they access different parts of that field. That is one part of us realizing this extraordinary potential. We begin to think very differently. The way to access, and this is where it gets so interesting, the only way to access those fields is through the human heart. Mm-hmm. And in 1991, scientists found about 40,000. They discovered them. They had always been there. It was just a new discovery to the scientists. About 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart that are brain-like cells, neurites, sensory neurites. But they're not in the brain. They think, feel, and remember in the heart, separately from the brain. And these cells are especially attuned to these places in the field, which is why intuition is so powerful. When we get that intuitive hit that something is about to happen in our lives, what's happening is those fields we're actually communicating through our heart. And when you begin living, and these are very, very simple techniques to help us access these extraordinary potentials. When you begin living that way, you are less plugged in to the changes in your external world, and they don't scare you the way that they have in the past, and you can deal with the changes.
Sure.
Because you're not in the place of survival. And this is where I think the next great frontier in science and human physiology is going, is learning about these. The heart has actually been reclassified now from a muscle to an organ, because it also is generating very specific kinds of hormones into the body based upon the way we feel. So the new science is telling us that we're more than just a machine, that we're not stuck with what we have when we come into this world. We have the ability to self-regulate. Epigenetics is a big part of that on the DNA level. So through our perceptions and how we feel about the world, we're actually mirroring those changes, those perceptions in the human body. And in the presence of the global changes that we're talking about, this becomes a vital survival mechanism for us. As we embrace our inner technology, then we're able to thrive in the presence of the new world, rather than waiting for the world to go back to the way it used to be, or just trying to survive by a thread, of survival. It's a very different way of thinking.
Yeah, but what you're describing, which is really interesting, is the essential emergence of a new human. And that's not, those words, it's easy for those words to just go by your head and not think about it. I mean, this is new. This is different.
Sure.
This is fundamentally a new way of seeing yourself and seeing the world. And it manifests itself, as you suggested, in your physiology. There's mainstream geneticists who are now saying that your grandchildren are going to be a whole new species, and they're going to have 3 and 4 strands of DNA, and it's already showing up different places in the world. That is just a fundamentally new kind of species.
Well, it is, and here's the thing. We talk about this. We are a generation that's learning, and we have a choice as to whether or not we adapt to these things or not. Once you begin to adapt and you learn a certain way of breathing and a certain way of focusing awareness in your body, gives you a strong immune system, and your longevity enzymes kick in, and you don't have to be at 80, what we always thought 80 is. Once you do that, who's going to go back? And now you begin a new generation of young people that begin to think and focus differently. But here's the thing, in addition to the other changes that we talked about, to climate, economic, and conflict cycles converging, there's another cycle, and it's a cycle of technology. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is we are at a point right now where there is one way of thinking that says we must embody the technology within us. We must replace parts of us with gadgets to survive. Yeah. And there's another part of another school of thought saying we're wired to do all the things that those external gadgets are doing. We don't know about that yet. And as we become aware of those abilities, the whole point is, why would we give our humanness away to the machines, at least until we understand what it means to be human? And this is where the technology...
It's almost like a philosophical split.
Well, it is.
So on one hand is you keep running down this technological, Cartesian, whatever kind of track to try to make your machines more complex and integrate them with it. And the other one, which is such a profound big idea, says everything you need, you have. I mean, that's amazingly powerful.
I'm going to just anchor this with an example. So for example, Elon Musk, who I have a lot of respect for, he's a brilliant visionary pioneer, he's pushing the boundaries of technology. Has a company, Neuralink, developing the first chips to implant into the human brain that link us directly to the hard drive of a computer. Right. Now, young people say, man, that is sweet. Who wouldn't want that? We are rarely taught that in the outer layers of the neocortex in our brain, which we were given 200,000 years ago when we showed up, we have neurons that are called mirror neurons that allow us to learn very, very quickly rather than connecting us through a gadget to a hard drive, those mirror neurons they allow us to learn very quickly without that. We already are that technology. But if you don't know that, you think that you need to have those chips. Once we begin giving ourselves, our humanness away, the external technology, those abilities atrophy within us, and we become less and less human. And the question is, how much of our humanness are we willing to give away? At least, my feeling is we should at least know what it is that we're giving away before we give it away. And that's the subject of a lot of the talks.
Exactly, right. That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow.
I don't know if I can say tomorrow, Saturday.
17th.
Saturday the 17th, Berkeley
August,
Springs.
Right,
yeah, that's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and so they're extraordinary, exciting, big ideas here. I mean, this is an amazing time to be alive. I mean, never before in history has there been all of this converging, this extraordinary change, which, if any kind of history is any analog, says that it's just going to get rapid, amazing kind of transition into a new world that operates in a whole different kind of ways.
But I think the really good news, that the change can be so frightening to people until they realize that we literally are wired for this kind of change, to thrive, not just survive. We're wired to thrive in this kind of change if we embrace the deepest truths of our existence. And I think that's the greatest service we can give to ourselves now, is to embrace what those truths are telling us.
Well, you have to become these new humans. You have to somehow access and open up. It's so interesting to me, because it's just the whole of the environment is all trying to convince you that it's just the same old way, and you just need to do this incremental change out on the edge and move into the new little place on the edge of the box. It's not that. This is extraordinary, exponential change. It's profound.
People tend to live within the confines of what they know to be true. And you say people aren't doing these things that we're talking about, accessing the ability to enhance their immune response or longevity enzymes or whatever. It's not mainstream, and very few people are talking about this. The reason people have asked me, they said, why, I was just doing an interview recently, why aren't we talking about this? Money, power, ego, and habit are the 4 reasons, and especially at the university level. Those are the reasons they're not sharing this with the young people. But we're getting young people all over the world, sold out rooms, coming to our programs because they're embracing this new technology. And it means different things to different people. But to everyone, it says there's more to us than what we've been led to believe. We're not what we've been told, and we're more than we've been led to believe.
Well, that's important. I mean, there's an underlying principle for this as far as I'm concerned, and that is, what do you know for sure? I mean, the more you dig into almost anything, you find out, well, wait a second, it may not be what everybody told us or what we as humans or science or whatever thought. You know, it's all subject to change. And so you have this need, this permeability, this openness, so the new ideas can come in, so you can surf into this new space.
I love this new space. I don't know how much time do we have? Can we talk?
We've got 2 more minutes.
2 minutes. I think that this is really, really the most empowering conversation that we can have with one another, because if we look at what the media is feeding us, the media machine, we're being led to believe that we are very powerless in a world that is out of control.
Right.
And that we need to find our protection. We become victims from some external source.
Right.
And that gives way to a lot of problems. When we embrace our internal technology that was given to us by who or whatever 200,000 years ago, and we really begin to embrace what this means, it changes the way that we think and the way we look at the world. It changes the way we solve our problems. And in a world of 8 billion people, globalizing together with different beliefs, this is the common denominator. We are human. And as we embrace the deepest truths of our humanness, we empower ourselves to thrive in the world that's emerging. That's the new human.
Yeah. Whole new idea about who we are and what we can do. It's amazingly empowering for me, I think. And it's wonderful to be here at this period of time.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to have you with us.
We're just getting started. I look forward to our next.
And thank you, Gregg Braden, for being with us here on Postscript. It's been a delightful conversation, and we very much appreciate your coming to our little town of Berkeley Springs, just down the road from Washington and Baltimore, where we have these transition talks once a month, and we hope that you'll come and be with us if you can. We have a wonderful lineup of folks, and you can find it all at transitiontalks.org. So come and see us in Berkeley Springs, and thank you for being with us today. And I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute.